Hey, welcome back, everybody. Time for another edition of Health Talks with Dr. Trinh. The one show, maybe the only show, that shows you how to live a healthier life and answer some of the common questions we're all asking ourselves today. Like this morning's fascinating topic about learning with the man who's learned to be curious. Dr. Trinh, how are you, sir?
I am good. And I'm very excited about today's topic.
I think it's a fascinating topic. This came across my desk at the radio station here, and I said, this is for Dr. Trinh. It's something I have long felt and wondered about, and wondered if there was really any real, as you like to say, some data proving it. We've teased it enough here this morning. We're talking about the differences between cultures and how in East Asia, where Dr. Trin's originally born, how there is a different culture for learning and turning out kids who become exceptional. And I'll just preface it by saying that here in Orange County, where we have the largest Vietnamese population outside of Vietnam, along with a large Chinese population, a large Korean population, we see, my stat may be off, but here at the University of California, Irvine, where we're streaming live from this morning,
yes,
I got to believe it's about 40% Asian, and a high percentage of the valedictorians and whatnot here in Orange County come from East Asia. To try and explain this is a man who wrote a book about it, Dr. Grove, all the way from Brooklyn. Dr. Grove, how are you, sir?
I am fine, thank you, and hello from Brooklyn, New York.
So am I just being, I don't know, am I just, I don't want to sound, I'm going to be very delicate about this. I don't want to sound racist. I don't want to sound like I'm making assumptions or anything here. But here in Southern California, we just sort of assume that the Asian kids are smarter or harder working and that they're going to rise and excel. Is that based on any reality? Are they overperforming the rest of the kids here?
Well, this is exactly what I looked into. It's interesting how you phrased your question. You said, are they smarter or harder working?
Yeah, right.
The answer to that question is no, they are not smarter. They are harder working, period. That's
really?
The answer.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wait, so Dr. Grove, is it true that if I got an A- in class, it's equivalent to an Asian F?
Yeah,
true? Is that true? I don't know.
Well, that depends on your family, but there's no doubt, as is discussed at some length in The Drive to Learn, that it is extremely important to Asian parents and to East Asians in general that they do very, very well on academic tests, academic measurements. You know, in the United States, a lot of parents, their hopes for their children are that they will be well-rounded.
Yes.
That was my parents' hope. It's okay, be smart, get good grades. That was great, but we want you to play ball.
Have friends,
we want you
join clubs, play sports.
Yeah, right.
And nothing that I have written intends to denigrate that value system or that point of view. My work was driven just by one thing, by the fact that since the late 1960s, children around the world, usually I believe at the 4th grade, the 8th grade, and the senior level, have been given what are generally known as international comparative tests.
Right.
The most well-known one right now is called Program for International Student Assessment, PISA, P-I-S-A. It's run by OECD, I believe. And since those tests began in late 1960, in the late 1960s, on every single measure, math, science, reading, whatever, on every single measure, on every single test, without a single exception in over 50 years, East Asian students have come out at or near the top.
Wow.
And American students have come out somewhere in the middle, and on a few embarrassing occasions, even below the middle.
Why
This
is
has
that?
never been different. What's the explanation for that? Can we just let that go by and say, oh, that's interesting?
Right.
Well, I guess a lot of people do, but I didn't want to. But what's really interesting here is that I hardly am the only person who has an interest in this. It turns out that in the late 1960s, when this happened the very first time, there were some Australian scholars based at a university in Hong Kong who said, wait a minute, the Americans are performing in a mediocre fashion, and this money at school we're teaching with progressive methods, and we got libraries and they
latest science equipment, we got everything. We put tons of money into our schools.
Yeah, and we're not getting the results that we want. And so they said, we got to figure out why this is. And that began a research effort that only now, 50 years later, is winding down. In those 50 years, I estimate that over 1,000 professional articles in journals and books have been published by anthropologists and others who've gone to East Asia to look around and see what's going on. And the great thing is, they not only looked at what was going on in the schools, and most of their effort in the schools was at the lower grades, preschool and lower primary, but they also looked at what was going on in homes. So when I got interested in this about, well, now it's about 8 or 9 years ago, I started looking at this literature and seeing that there was just mounds and mounds of studies of every conceivable kind, most of it anthropological in nature, not all of it. And as I began reading, I realized that there are really two explanations. One is, how are these children raised at home? And the other is, how are they taught at school? And the more I read, the more I realized that the home side of that was very important.
That's my impression. Now, obviously, I'm a good Irishman here. I was raised in the Midwest. I'm kind of the typical suburban kid that went through school. And when I came to Southern California in the 80s and started seeing what was happening in universities here, and eventually raised my own daughter and went through the same experience, Asian parents, as Dr. Trinh alluded to, have a different, a fanatical feeling about education. It's not an option. You will get educated. You will excel. You will study hard. Where does that come from, Dr. Trinh? Why is this so different in their experience? We all want our kids to do well.
It comes from an A- is an Asian F.
Yeah. But why is it? Why is it? Why are these? I'll ask Dr. Trinh first. Did he experience that? Were your parents were Vietnamese immigrants?
I was lucky. I actually did not experience that. Part of it is because my parents were and I can only speak from my own experience, right? As a little kid in Vietnam, being a refugee in the United States from the Vietnam War, it comes from the fact that that we believe, especially if you're from a society that's considered like a third world, right?
Right.
And you're poor, and there's not a lot of opportunities for growth, employment. There's not a lot of opportunity where you can be a doctor, a professor, a lawyer. Your only way out is education. Mm-hmm. And so I think in our cultural mindset, if you come from a background or a culture where there's not a lot of opportunities, then that opportunity that you see as the way out is education. And I think that's why we focus or super focus or hyper focus on the need to educate. And when we're talking about education, it's not just going to school 8 to 5. It's like tutoring, piano lessons. It's everything else on the week. Is Kumon on the weekend, or
right, math, right? Yeah,
math, and it's like, oh my, and so it's like being pretty vigilante toward education.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, now we've had other immigrant groups. We have large Persian population. We have large Hispanic population. We have large Philippine population. None of which, I don't know about the Persian population per se, but the other populations don't put the same emphasis on it. Yes, go to school. I'm not saying they don't, like Americans who've been here for multi-generations, like I grew up in. It's just what the doctor said. Of course we want you to do well. But that wasn't what our parents drove home to us. Sports was a big deal. I see here in Orange County, more parents probably focused on, yeah, it's great if you're smart, little Jimmy, but why don't you go get a scholarship, or why don't you go help me pay for this thing by this? And I'm just thinking back to my daughter's basketball team. I don't remember a lot of Asian kids on the basketball team. And I understand, this is basketball, and I get the joke, that Asians are not generally as tall as some other ethnic groups, but I didn't see that anywhere. I saw those kids were in the library studying, and the other kids that my daughter grew up around were all out fanatically playing some sport, because their parents fanatically hoped that they would get something. Is my experience borne out, doctor? Is this are the parents putting different emphasis in different places?
The parents definitely are putting different emphasis on different places. And that is really how they do it. Why they do that and how they do that is the topic of the drive to learn. Again, just for your listeners, I want to emphasize that this isn't my personal research. I am drawing on the research of literally hundreds of other scholars who over 50 years have been going to East Asia. And by the way, they're not all from this country. They've come from Europe. They're even around 2000. East Asian scholars began to get in and do work looking at their own culture and contributing to this body of knowledge that now exists. So let me say something. I don't think we're on video, are we? But
yeah, we are. Actually, hold up the book. Yeah, you're moving it around there a little bit.
The cover of this
lower it just a little bit. Just lower it just a little bit, just so I can see the title first here. Let's start with that.
Okay.
All right. So it's The Drive to Learn, and the subtitle is What the East Asian Experience Teaches Us About Raising Students Who Excel. And then you have a companion book, How they teach students to excel. So hold it up. You were going to make a point about the cover there. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I was worrying about the cover of this book, it was important to me that I find a picture, and there are many stock houses that have thousands and thousands
millions,
of photographs, and they're on the web now, and you go through them hour after hour looking for something. I was looking for a photograph in which a parent, it would appear to be that a parent and a child were mutually and seriously involved in studying something, in learning, and learning something like mathematics, for example.
Together,
right?
Not just saying go upstairs and do something.
And you can find in the stock houses, you can find dozens and dozens of these pictures, but you know why I didn't choose any of them?
No.
Because they're all having fun.
Yeah.
They're looking at the screen and laughing and pointing, or they're looking at the books, or they're mugging for the camera, or the child is studying and then the parent is behind just looking approvingly, but not assisting in any way. I finally decided, guys, that I had to convene my own photo shoot. This picture cost me over $2,000.
Whoa.
Isn't it wonderful? It's a wonderful picture.
It is. It's a beautiful
Yes,
picture.
yes.
Right?
They're obviously at home. You can see the burners on the stove.
Right.
They've got a workbook. It's actually a math workbook. Both of them have pencils in hand, and they are jointly thinking about a math problem as a serious joint effort.
Yeah.
This is very important. You can't find pictures like this in American stockhouses. It's all fun and games.
You hit something on the head here, and I want to explore it for a second here. When I was a kid, I'm a man of a certain age. I'm in my mid-60s here, so I grew up in a different educational environment than my daughter grew up in. Let's put it that way. And it was not about fun and games when I was a kid. It was rote memory. You know, you memorized the states and the capitals. You memorized the Gettysburg Address. You memorized math repeatedly. You practiced your handwriting repeatedly. A lot of it was just practice. And we came to hate that. And we said, that's horrible. You're not learning anything. You're just memorizing. And yet, when my daughter decided at her father's urging that she was going to go into sports, and she's going to follow the old man and fulfill my dream, because I'm tall, but I was never very good at basketball. So she's going to make up for, I'm going to live vicariously through her. I wasn't worried about her studies. I wanted her to go out and do what I never did and play basketball here. What do you do in sports? You wrote memory over and over again. You dribble the ball over and over again. You shoot the ball. There's not a lot of discussion. There's not a lot of debate. The coach says, this isn't fun. Go do your laps again. If you don't want to do it, get out of here. I got 20 other kids that want this slot.
Here's one thing that comes out of the research. East Asian parents, with respect to education,
Right.
East Asian parents relate to their children as an athletic coach and trainer.
Yeah.
But whereas American parents relate as cheerleaders.
Exactly. Perfectly said.
That's interesting. That's that's probably correct when I think about that. By the way, Dr. Grove, our audience wants to know who you are. What's your background?
Yes, right. We jumped right into this. What brought you out? Where do you teach? How did you get into this? Why would you be fascinated with this topic?
Well, okay, I'll try to make this as short as I can. You're not the only people to ask me this question, of course, so I've got a little practice. So I'm originally from Amish country in Pennsylvania. You may have heard of Lancaster County.
Yeah, Bucks County. I know.
I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and then I went to Johns Hopkins University, and I ended up getting a Master of Arts in Teaching from Johns Hopkins University. And I did teach high school for secondary school for 4 years.
Okay.
And then I took with my wife, then I went into educational publishing, and I met my wife, who is actually on the other side of the door here.
Don't let her in. We can keep her out.
Don't let her in. She's from the United Kingdom. And we went abroad. We went abroad for 2 years just to live in different places and travel. So that was nice before we had children. We eventually had 3 boys. And then I went back to university. I went to Columbia University Teachers College, originally with the intent of becoming a high school counselor. Mm-hmm. But I quickly realized, having lived abroad from 2 years, and I've traveled through Africa and so forth, that what really interested me was culture, and culture as applied to education. How does culture affect education? Mm-hmm. So for my doctoral dissertation,
and that's a touchy topic. I mean, we don't want to assume that any culture is any different, ever. We want to assume that all cultures, the minute you start saying one culture is different, you start sounding like you're putting them down, or you're extolling them, or one's better, and all that kind of stuff.
If you let on that you think one culture is fundamentally of greater value than another, then you get into that problem. But
right.
God knows, I don't see how anybody can say that they're not cultural differences. That's the whole premise of our discussion today.
Yeah. And I will tell you, even within, we'll break down the so-called white race. I always hate that terminology because I don't know what that means, because I don't see any similarity between Irish Catholics like myself and mainline Protestants and evangelicals. All have different views on raising their kids and educating their kids and what's important. And regionally, where I grew up in the Midwest, that's a very different experience, I got to tell you guys, than growing up in Tennessee or growing up in Vietnam. The emphasis is not about, at least where I grew up, it was not about standing out. It was about fitting in.
Yep.
If that makes sense. It may be hard to understand, but it wasn't about excelling. It was about being accepted and being part and mainstreaming. And you don't want to be too smart or too dumb. You don't want to be too pretty or too ugly. You don't want to be, that middle is what everybody's striving for.
In my profession, we call those cultures communitarian.
Yeah.
As opposed to individualistic.
Very much so, very communitarian. And it was about helping and giving, and there were a lot of other positive aspects of it, but it was about, if you stood out too much, you were looked at askance. There's an old-fashioned word. You were looked at and wondered at.
The Japanese say, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down.
Yeah, right. That was my experience in the Midwest. Wow. That's why I got the hell out.
So continue, Dr. Grove. I want to hear your story.
So for my doctoral dissertation, since I had lived in Portugal, at that point I spoke Portuguese not too badly. Certainly wouldn't say I was fluent, but I certainly could carry on conversation. So I decided to go to a school district in Massachusetts, or I should probably say that I got them to invite me because I didn't just show up. Right. I went to a school district in Massachusetts where there was a heavy influx of immigrant Portuguese students. And I was particularly interested in, and this was really fundamental to my research. I was really interested in students who had gone to school in Portugal for preschool and the lower grades, but at some point in the middle of their school career, their parents had immigrated to Massachusetts, to this particular small city in Massachusetts, so that after 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years in Portuguese schools, they came into an American school. Mm-hmm. And I was interested not in how much difficulty they had learning English, because that's been studied up the wazoo. And
English is a crazy language without rules and everything. That's a difficult thing. Yeah.
So the question, my question was, except for language learning, what are they experiencing? What kind of challenges are they having? How do they experience American education?
Right.
And I can tell you, I had a 400-page dissertation. I can tell you the conclusion that the students had in just a few words.
Okay.
They said, American education is a joke.
Woo!
Wow.
Ouch.
Really? Wow.
They said, what they often said was, it's not serious.
Yeah.
If you were serious about getting us to learn, you'd be doing things differently here.
Interesting you say that, because I grew up in Catholic schools and then at some point pivoted to public schools around junior high. And I was stunned, as Cecilia writes here. She grew up in Canada, and you had to bow and show respect and
to your teachers
and stuff. The principal came in, and I immediately stood up and said, stood up, and the principal came in, and everybody laughed at me in the class. Much more lax. Teachers had much less respect and, I would say, authority.
Yes, I believe these days kids are calling their teachers by their first names now. That never would have gone down in my day.
No. Hey, Joe, how you doing? And it becomes, as you said, this kind of cheerleading aspect. It's not about pushing them. If it gets too tough, that's okay. And there was never any. So I'm thinking, as a typical American parent, Well, isn't that great? That's wonderful. Of course, we don't want to drive these kids and push these. We would never force them to do something. We'd never be mean. We'd never be disciplined. We'd never be difficult. And yet, go through sports today. It's the old school. The coach doesn't ask you to do this. He doesn't cheerlead you and say, "Attaboy, go get him." He's like, "Get your butt out there." And, you know,
This is one of the things that often is pointed out, that we treat athletics and academics very, very differently
Totally.
in this country.
Totally.
Yeah. And, you know, we're willing to see our kids sweat and you know, and fail and try again
and cry and get hurt and get up and do it again. And yeah, right.
Yeah. We want to do this in sports, but we just really coddle them when it comes to education. This is actually part of the question that originally many years, well, we're talking about 16 or 17 years ago now, when I first got involved in trying to figure out what's going on in American education, I wrote another book, which, you know, we're not really here to talk about today, but I wanted to see where attitudes like this came from historically.
Yeah.
And that book, hold on.
Yeah.
That book is entitled The Aptitude Myth.
Ooh, what is, how an ancient
Hold it up again here. How an
ancient
Go ahead.
belief came to undermine children's learning today.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Explain that, Dr. Grove.
Well, anthropologists have known for a long time, this isn't the kind of thing that's even discussed in anthropology anymore, because it's well established that Americans, well, we actually started off right at the beginning, we were talking about this. Americans think that, tend to think that the main reason why children do well in school or not is because their inborn intelligence,
Exactly.
or their smarts, as people say, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in most of the rest of the world, and this is certainly true in East Asia, it's about hard work. They know what aptitude is. They're not saying, oh, you know, aptitude is bunkum. They don't say that. They just say, it doesn't matter. You know what? Confucius was, you know, I forget the exact quote, but he basically said, well, if you're not quite as adept mentally as others, so just work harder.
Work
you know,
harder.
That's it. Work harder.
And again, go back to the sports analogy. You know, I'm a basketball fanatic. So the great Michael Jordan, one of the greatest players of my generation, was dropped from his high school basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And what did he take away? I have to work harder. What made Michael Jordan, and after him, people like Kobe Bryant, great? No question, they were gifted athletes, maybe exceptionally.
These days, the response probably would be to sue.
Yeah, right. But the point he was making is, I had to work harder at it. And when you look at the Kobe Bryants of the world, what I've studied so much, what made him such a phenomenal player. He wanted to be Michael Jordan and then some. If everybody came in at 6, he was there at 4. If everybody left at 8, he was there till 10. Nobody shot more free throws than he did. Nobody did more work. And other athletes have said, I mean, it's almost inhuman. That's the way I view some Asian kids and the way they study. It's almost inhuman.
And so knowing this and seeing this with our own eyes, as you guys have in Southern California, do we need any additional explanation about why they win all these awards and now are always the salutatorian and the valedictorian? Do we need any more explanation? No, we don't. It's very, very clear that this is the most important thing to East Asian families or other immigrant families, such as from Vietnam. And this is their sine qua non of children's being successful as they grow up.
Don't start quoting Latin now.
Everybody's attention. It gets the parents' attention. It gets the grandparents' attention. It gets the siblings' attention. The families are unified on this. And hey, the results come. The results come. Are we surprised?
So let me ask you a devil's advocate question.
Yes.
So everything's focused on education getting the grades, getting to the good colleges. What are we sacrificing as a result? What about like self-esteem, or what about not being well?
Let's stop right there. Let's talk about self-esteem.
Okay, yeah.
There's been some research on self-esteem in East Asia.
Right.
The researchers went in. The first thing they realized is East Asians don't have a word for this.
Really?
The concept doesn't exist.
Self-esteem is not it doesn't come with its own verb in word in Vietnamese or Chinese.
This is our issue. It's not an issue around the world.
Oh.
They had to cook up. They had to construct a Chinese phrase. I wish I could find it quickly. It's in, I think it's discussed in this book.
Right.
They had to come up with a 3 or 4 word phrase. This particular research was done in Taiwan. They had to come up with a constructed 4-word phrase to try to capture the concept of self-esteem, so that they could do this anthropological, and interview people. And some of the mothers and grandparents and so forth that they interviewed still didn't quite understand what they were talking about. They said, oh, well, if a student feels like that, they'll just get uppity. They won't listen to their parents anymore. They have too much self-esteem. So we're not in favor of that. But this was, I want to remind you again, this is in a discussion situation where before the researchers got there, they weren't thinking about this at all.
Right.
This was not on their radar screen.
Okay,
So
what about the word well-rounded? Like, if all I was doing was being a bookworm, I'm not well-rounded.
Right.
So make your choice. I mean, choose. You can't be, there may be exceptions, all right? There's some very, very incredible people in the world. So leaving those few folks aside, for most of us, certainly for myself, just speak for myself,
hard to do it all.
I could be well-rounded, or I could be a top student, and those two things didn't mesh all that well because if I was going to be a top student, I had to apply myself to the books. In my case, I did very well in high school and university, and I was active, but not in sports. I was very active in student affairs, but not in sports at all. 0.
So let me ask the real bomb thrower question as we get into the second half here. And I'm going to try and do this delicately so that the bomb doesn't explode in my face here. We are in a time where the dominant culture in America that I grew up with, this so-called white culture that America was supposed, white Christian culture, is feeling afraid. Others are repacing us. Others are eating our lunch in other countries. We're fearful of immigrants taking our jobs, and all this stuff comes up, and there's this underlying bubbling fear. And I feel like, wake up. If that's what you're afraid of, is there a ticking time bomb that's going to take off when these 40% Asian kids at UCI become the doctors, lawyers?
It might already be happening. I mean, you go to a hospital these days, Dr. Trinh, I think you've got an MD, right?
Yeah.
And I can do a prostate exam.
So, yeah. So again, are we, then we purport, my friends, relatives, and all these people who are afraid of these cultural issues are not, I feel like our kids are being left behind, and because of choices we made. And we are therefore going to cry and bemoan when all the top executives, all the top jobs are not filled with familiar little white faces here anymore.
What's really a shame
our kids
about
fall
this,
behind.
If you go back in American history 100 years, 150 years, the Americans at that time, which mostly were from Europe,
right?
I'm aware that there were slaves. Okay, I'm not talking about them.
Right,
but
Native Americans.
the Americans at that time, worked like crazy.
Yeah.
You know, so this is actually in our past, but it's slipped away.
Because we were the first, because, and this goes to my general thesis, the immigrant experience, I don't want to get on too big of a soapbox, is what keeps this American dream, work hard and you'll succeed and anything's possible.
They come here, they think, you know, if I work like the devil, I can be really successful. And
all immigrants.
Dr. Trinh and others are an example that that's true.
And then 2-3 generations down, they get slackers. They become, that's the word. Things are good. I don't have to work that hard. Everything. And that motivation that brought people here to sacrifice everything. Oh my goodness. And to work 12 jobs, 12 hours a day, that fades. And I see it even within Asian communities. The 3rd and 4th generation kids aren't as motivated as the 1st generation.
Yeah, they're enjoying comfort and convenience, and they're picking up American individualism.
Right.
And so the original drive to learn,
right,
slips away.
Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody else drive me. I'll just sit in the back.
So I wonder if that same the melting pot melts away, that drive melts away. Again, it's more about me, and it's about finding myself, and less about fitting in, and less about excelling. Maybe I'm just going to find my own path.
Huge emphasis in this culture on finding oneself and being true to oneself and doing what one really wants to do and being authentic. There's a whole chapter about that in here.
My father, who was the...
Is that a bad thing? Is that a bad thing?
Well,
bad's a value judgment.
You make your choices. If that's important to you and you work at it and you find yourself, whatever that means, good for you.
Right.
Good for you.
I'll give you my story in this. So my father was the son of immigrants. So I'm a 3rd generation. And I remember my dad grew up very poor in the Depression, World War II, everything, worked his ass off. First guy there in the morning, last guy to leave. I never saw a man work harder in my life. And so as I entered college and I left college, I endlessly went through different jobs. My dad said, "What are you doing?" "I'm trying to find myself." He said, "Why don't you just find a job?"
You picked up the culture. You know?
My dad was just, go find a job. What's this find yourself? Just find a job, and that's it. That's your career. Yeah. Work hard.
So, by the way, I want to get back to Dr. Trin's question, which we've gotten away from, but I just wanted to say that as a result of doing the dissertation in Massachusetts, where I found that Portuguese students, immigrant Portuguese students who had spent time in Portuguese elementary schools, after they came into American secondary schools, they were very, very disappointed by the experience that they had, which they said, this isn't serious. You know, you're trying to get people to learn to spell, and in class you're playing spelling baseball.
Yeah.
You ever heard of spelling baseball?
No.
This is crazy. They said to me in Portuguese, "Não somos crianças." That means we are not children. We are scholars. We are students. We expect to learn, to be held accountable, to, pal on the books and come out really feeling that we're in command of the subjects we have studied. We have mastered them.
Mm-hmm.
Let me give you another little bombshell thing here.
That's not what you guys are doing here.
So let me give you...
So that experience, now a whole bunch of years passed, but I kept thinking about this and how interesting this was, and that it's probably true for other cultures. And then I had a chance to go to China and live and work there and teach there for a while. And so that really upped my interest in East Asia. And so eventually, I got interested in why our students are always behind East Asian students. And then I discovered this huge body of research. And I thought, I need to do something to bring this to the public. These scholars, I believe that there are literally hundreds of scholars who have used part of their career to try to understand what's going on in East Asia. And the problem is with anthropologists and these other scholars is that they mainly talk to each other.
Oh,
They write their articles for each other.
Yeah.
sure.
And they go to conferences and talk to each other. But as a matter of fact, there's a lot of valuable stuff here for Americans about thinking about how to improve their educational system, which most Americans aren't very complimentary of, by
No.
the way.
No.
And so, here's some things that we can think about. These two books, by the way, are mainly involved in helping us understand the values that drive what the East Asians do.
So let me
school.
see if I can cut another bomb thrower in as in our last 10 minutes here. There is another thing that we're not talking about that's in the American character and has been here from the beginning, that's been much written about. We as a society, somebody was saying, why aren't there more Asians in politics? We as a society don't seem to value the smart. We distrust experts. We distrust brainy people. What do they know? We're individuals. I'm as good as they are. What do they think? They're better than I am? We don't have a culture of deference to smart people, to scientists or whatever, whether it's Dr. Fauci or others. We immediately go, he's not so smart. I don't think I like this guy. We tend to elect politicians, the famous Adlai Stevenson case where he was supposedly smarter than all the other people, but he's not the guy that got elected. He was an egghead. He didn't relate to the ordinary man. We love guys that relate to the ordinary people.
Way back in the 60s, there was a book written about this topic called Anti-Intellectualism in American Life.
Big time.
Won the Pulitzer Prize by Hofstadter.
Yeah, Richard Hofstadter. There you go. Right.
Yeah. If you want to know where this comes from, you can do worse than start by reading that book.
So we start with an assumption that being too smart is not a good thing. We don't hold, as American society, hold them up in esteem. We view them with a little doubt.
And they do in Asia. See, that's it.
Yeah, exactly.
Those scholars are at the top of the heap in Asia.
Teachers.
In China for 1,300 years, the way to get to the top of the social and power hierarchy was by a single 3-day exam.
Wow. That's a pressure.
Really?
And don't they still have that in other cultures, even in England and others?
Many cultures and East Asian cultures put far more faith in the results of a critical exam than we do.
Yes.
We have tended gradually to play that down more and more, and you see it going out now because the SAT and the ACT are in a process of fading away now.
Diminishing. We're uncomfortable with a standardized test. I want to get to know you. I want to get an essay. I want to get other things. Yeah. One
of the comparisons I made in my book is that if you're a high school student here in the United States and you want to go to college, what do you in order to get a college to invite you? What can you do? Well, you might take the SAT or the ACT, not so much recently. Right. You have your grades, you have your teacher recommendations, you have the recommendation from your priest or pastor or the person down the street or whatever.
You write a personal essay. Right.
You have your summer jobs, you have your internships, you have
personal essays. They got to write personal essays.
Oh yes, the famous or infamous personal essays. And maybe your parents went to that school, so you get an extra edge.
Right.
Or maybe your father or your mother is a huge donor to that school.
Exactly.
In which case
Harvard.
you get an extra edge. Yeah. These are all the things that you can use in various combinations to get in.
Right.
In East Asia, one test, the Gaokao, that's it.
What? One test?
What
about volunteer experience, research experience, letters of recommendation?
Certainly not historically. They very much look at us and try to understand what we be. Maybe this is coming in to some extent. I'm not aware of it. Historically, and we're just talking recent history, it's the test, just like the exam over 1,300 years, that was the way to get to the top
Now, for those children that didn't work as hard or didn't have as much innate ability that failed the test, It must be a
Yeah,
failure
and
in life. It must be one test determines whether I go up or whether I go down, whether I advance or whether I stay where I'm at.
yeah. And another one of the things that brings a smile to my face is the fact that nowadays, kids get really upset in many cases if the test is more than 2 hours long, or
Yeah.
they might eat extra time for this reason or that reason. That famous exam in China. You showed up with some food, with some water, and with your chamber pot, and you were put in a room, and you came out 3 days later and handed in your paper. That was it. 3 days later.
All right.
Whoa.
So on the downside, the pressure for those who don't succeed must be enormous. Does that lead to higher suicide? Does that lead to depression? I know what happens to the kids that don't succeed,
especially in Korea now. There is the pressure. It can be overwhelming. This is true. But here we have almost no pressure. We have comparatively, I shouldn't say no pressure, that's ridiculous. We have comparatively little pressure.
Right. Well, overwhelmingly, your audience here, Dr. Trinh, seems to be kind of two minds. One is we need discipline, we need hard work, but don't push the kids too hard. Let's not crack them. Let's not break them. Let's let them find themselves. I see two strains running through the comments here.
Typical American culture right there. That's it. Kids are far more resilient than I think we give them credit for. And that's also one of the things I discuss in the Aptitude Myth.
Right.
This is a fascinating history to
I'm going to suggest you do another book and compare the sports culture versus the educational culture. I know you've alluded to it because
I'd be way too disappointing. I couldn't do that without weeping.
Because but truthfully, look, we push kids to excel in sports today in a way even beyond. My daughter, I adopted my daughter from Mexico. So when we adopted her, she was in 5th grade, and she was very gifted anyway. And so we put her into sports, and I wanted her to be in sports. And one of the parents came up and said, "It's a shame she'll never be on varsity." We're talking about 5th grade. I said, "Why?" Because these kids have been studying since they were 6 and 7. They've got coaches. They've been working at it. She can't catch up. Now, she did through hard work, and she did make it. But that assumption was that it wasn't just for fun. You couldn't just walk on like it was more in my day. It was a discipline that was driven into these kids since their earliest time. In the same way you're referring to Asians saying, hit the books. My kids are saying, hit the court, hit the baseball field, repeat, get coaching, all that kind of stuff. So it isn't that we're not opposed to driving our kids. We're just...
Oh, no, we're not. Yes, this is a very important point for your listeners. Oh, we can drive them.
Yeah.
But not about school.
Not about school.
Wow. That's just crazy.
That's the takeaway. And
but something's got to give. I mean, if all you're doing is being in the books all day, what are we sacrificing? Something, aren't we giving up something?
Well, it depends on your value system.
Right.
It all depends on your value system. For some people to hit the books all day and not be able to join the clubs and participate in sports and go to dances and all those things, that's a significant loss.
Dr. Trinh, did you ever have any of your kids in sports in high school?
Yeah. Jonathan was in basketball. And
so did he have to go to summer camp? Did he have to go to travel ball? Did he have to put in extra coaching?
Yeah, both our kids did track and cross country, and they joined a bunch of clubs.
Because when my daughter was being considered to go to varsity, the coach told us flat out, "I will not accept your child unless you commit to do travel ball in the off season and drop all your other sports and focus on this one to one extent."
Can you imagine an American teacher of mathematics saying to parents, "Your kid can't come into my class unless they go to math camp in the summer"?
Right.
Think of the uproar
exactly
that would come from it.
Exactly. I mean, I was stunned. And he said, unless you're willing to commit 110%, drop every other sport, invest the extra time, go to travel ball, play round the clock. I'm not even going to consider your child for the team.
There you go. We have nothing comparable in academics.
Yeah.
That's wow. Karen says, let me see what Karen says here. we're forgetting that people can be very well educated and still be like evil or bad.
Well, that's true. Education isn't the answer for everything. It doesn't create happiness. It doesn't create wealth. Doesn't create happiness. You know, all those things.
I say parents, you know, cultures and extended families and parents each group has a set of values.
Right.
And you know, and you work with your kid and you drive your kid and you encourage your kid, and the whole, you know, it's part of the family culture. It's not so much that you've got to explain, it's just the way the whole family thinks, and the child is part of that culture. And so, you know, things happen and it probably comes out the way the parents want. But parents have very different values. For East Asian parents, the academic learning is very highly valued.
I'll give you another
the results.
I'll give you another comparison. I always remember vividly. There was a parent that I saw at all the camps and all the sports. His daughter was a step or two behind my daughter in playing ability. She just was. And as hard as she tried, she didn't ever excel to the level that he wanted. And ultimately, she did not make varsity. And I remember the final tryout. And he looked at me almost disgustedly and said, well, of course, your daughter made varsity. And I said, yeah, she did. And I thought to myself, and of course, your daughter didn't, because she was always a step or two behind. Now, take that arrogance aside. Oh, my daughter made it, yours didn't. And so I said, what's she going to do now? And he half-heartedly said, well, she's been accepted into some special writing program, and she's going to the performing arts school here. Like that was second best. Like she was academically, it turned out she was very bright and very successful, much more than my daughter was. And he was disappointed that he would rather she had made the varsity team and forget all this academic nonsense. And here she is winning awards, and he was crying because she missed varsity.
Is there time for me just to, along these lines, I'd just like to say something about a Mirror for Americans, which looks at what's going on in schools, and we haven't really gotten to that. Maybe we could convene
another
again
time. Right.
But really, my number one finding through my review and digestion of all the research that's been done in schools in East Asia, and there's actually more research about schools than there is about homes. I would say it's probably about 3/5 about schools and 2/5 about homes.
Okay.
Here's what stands out. In this culture these days, in the last, I don't know, decade or two or three, I wouldn't say, the real emphasis in education in this culture has been to ensure that classrooms are student-centered, not teacher-centered. This is a huge value of educators and others who care about education.
Right.
East Asia, they don't care about that. That's not what they talk about. Their classrooms are knowledge-centered. Knowledge-centered.
Ooh,
that's what this book is about.
Well, it's a fascinating discussion. We'll have to leave it there. Final thoughts, Dr. Trinh. You look sort of, dumbstruck. If I don't want to use the word dumb in a discussion about education here, but
in both worlds. I live in both worlds.
Yeah,
I have kids. I live in the world where, I totally get it. Kumon, extra classes, you're studying until that's all you do, right? And then I'm Americanized and I see the other culture and I'm like, now, ooh, which way should we push toward,
Right.
This way or that way? If all you're doing is pushing for grades, are you losing self-esteem and self-worth over here? If all you're doing is pushing for that every student should feel good about themselves, are you losing the academics, right? So
hey, you know how the East Asian students feel good about themselves? They get the top mark in the test.
Yeah, but not everybody can, and then therefore
the other
90%.
We're bringing you back. We are bringing you back.
I think so. Yeah.
And
I'll give you one more tease for a future episode. I'll go 1 or 2 minutes over. With the other question we're saying is, where do you have more success in life? Yes, some kids become doctors, lawyers. They're professions you have to have. You have to go to college and you have to get a degree. And I think that tends to be where the smart kids go. But do the smart kids necessarily rise to the top of corporations? Do they start businesses? I'm not so sure. You look at the Bill Gates, well, maybe Bill Gates is an exception, but some of these others are not necessarily the best and the brightest in school. The school was stifling their imagination and forcing them to conform. And the creative seekers that we admire, the entrepreneurs, are often the failures in school.
Well, I think we admire those folks because they tell us something, they show us something about individualism that we value, which is that the individual can have new thoughts and make a difference all by himself.
Right.
And those folks like Gates, and we could name many others.
Yeah, Gates
like
dropped out of Harvard. Yeah, right.
Yeah, they get a lot of attention. How representative they are of how ordinary children,
right,
have a good life and a good job and a good profession, I don't know. I don't know that they're representative. Really a very, very small sample of all all children.
I echo Dan Daly, our consistent listener here. Thanks for your comment, Dan. I totally agree. It says, bring Dr. Grove back. Very interesting topic. We will have to do that, Dr. Trinh here.
I'd be happy to come back.
We got to continue this topic. This is, we're just touching the surface.
So Dr. Trinh, did you get copies of both of these books
I don't think
from
he did.
my publicist?
I don't think he did.
I haven't, but I want to.
Oh, well, just ask her. I'll tell her. I'll get on the horn here right after we end and say, send Dr. Trinh a copy of both books.
Okay. Oh, I'd love to read it. And my kids actually they're done with high school. One's in college, one's out of college. Both doing really well, and they're academically successful.
Now, interesting. See what you said there. They're doing very well, and you had to say academically successful. You didn't say they're doing very well. They're finding themselves. They're doing very well. They're starting a business. They're doing very well. They're exploring the world. You instantly said they're doing very well. Meaning, and let me explain that they're doing academically very well.
But I still have the other mindset. It's like well-roundedness, right? Join clubs, and do you sacrifice your grades if you're joining all these other clubs?
Sure, you do.
Cheerleading, and if you're in,
Sure, you do.
This is a choice for you to make.
Right. Yes.
Make a choice. I mean, think about it. You got to do something. I'm not necessarily advocating one or the other. I'm just saying.
Pointing it out.
People wonder how come our kids are behind on the international comparative tests, and why all those immigrant kids are getting all the awards and are the valedictorian of the class. Here's the answer. The answer is plain, but maybe that's not what's important to you. So do your thing.
Okay.
Wow.
We're going to do our thing. We're going to wrap up the show here.
Wow. All right. You're coming back. We're going to look for the next date, and I'll email you guys today.
All right, but I've got to get these books to you. I think you would really enjoy. By the way, these books aren't big books. Look at this. They're both under 150 pages.
I like that small book, short book, short attention span.
There you go.
How do we find your books, Dr. Grove? Let's end with that.
If you can remember the title of the book, for example, this one is The Drive to Learn.
Right.
Just get on your browser and put in the drive-to-learn.info.
.info.
If you can remember A Mirror for Americans, just get on your browser and type in A Mirror for Americans.info.
Good to know.
Each book has its own website.
Wow. You probably are on Amazon as well. We can probably find those books on Amazon.
Any place that you can get books.
Got it.
You can get these books. Although they aren't carried in bookstores, but a bookstore can order it for you. Much better if you order wherever you go. I prefer Barnes and Noble. If you go to these websites, you'll get it from the publisher.
But the problem, Dr. Grove, is because we didn't excel at school, most of us can't read very well anymore here.
Audiobook.
Yeah, audiobook or a video.
They have ebooks. You can get ebooks here.
I need a comic book version of it. All right. Thank you so much. Fascinating topic. You open up all sorts of things talking about why what we observe is happening and what we and is it important for us to change that, or do we okay with that? And maybe in the long run, we'd rather the more well-rounded kids, even if they're not as academically successful. That's a choice we seem to be making.
Then don't complain if they're not the valedictorian.
Exactly. But by God, make sure they get on the varsity squad here, because that's what's really
Absolutely.
important.
Let's put first things first.
Thank you so much, Dr. Grove. Appreciate it.
Fascinating.
Thank you. Looking forward to coming back.
Yes.
All right, there you have it. If that's not a fascinating exchange, I don't know what is. One more reason to come back and check us out each and every Thursday here on Orange County's only community radio station, broadcasting live from the University of California, Irvine's Appeal Applied Innovation Center. It's Health Talks with Dr. Trinh.